and welcome to the channel. Today's video is all about doulas, what they are, and how to hire them. For anyone that doesn't know, a doula is a trained professional who provides continuous physical, emotional, and informational support to a mother before, during, and shortly after childbirth to help her achieve the healthiest, most satisfying experience possible. Think of a doula as a maternal, experienced person who is also your birth coach and biggest cheerleader through the process. Who can help you advocate for yourself, your baby, your birth plan, and can help with things like relaxation techniques and other comfort measures, no matter what type of birth you choose. They also support partners, whether it's dad, grandma, or whoever, in whatever their level of involvement in your birth. Some birth doulas also offer postpartum services like cooking, cleaning, lactation help, etc., though you might have to look into getting a separate dedicated postpartum doula if you're interested in these services, because not all birth doulas offer them. Doulas aren't medical professionals, but some of them might have experience in midwifery or nursing, and there are several organizations that offer certification. The biggest and most popular ones are DONA International and CAPA. If you're on the fence, hiring a doula actually has a huge impact on your birth experience, even if it ends up being one full of surprises that doesn't exactly go according to plan.
Quick, Plan B! Plan B!
Research shows a huge host of benefits to having a doula, such as moms are less likely to need Pitocin, they're less likely to have a C-section, and in fact, one randomized controlled trial found that C-section rates among women who had hired doulas were cut in half. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it was people going the all-natural route. They controlled for that. Still, C-section rate was cut in half, which is pretty amazing. Moms with doulas are also less likely to need interventions like forceps and vacuum extractions. They are less likely to use or request any pain medication. And again, that isn't just necessarily women that want to have natural births, that's women with doulas in general. On average, they also have shorter labors, they have fewer babies with low APGAR scores at 5 minutes of age, and are more likely to rate their childbirth experience positively.
Wow.
So, now that you know what doulas do and the benefits that they provide, the next step is to actually find one. There's a few different ways that you can do this. You can ask friends, your provider, your childbirth educator for any recommendations. I'm a little bit of an overachiever and started my doula search very early while living in a new state halfway across the country from all of my friends and family, so I had to get a little bit more creative. First, I found a local pregnancy and postpartum group on Facebook that I actually kind of stumbled on accidentally, but I was able to get some recommendations there. I also used a website called Doula Match, though it's one of those websites that's a lot like where I listed my psychotherapy services. It's something that you have to sign up for and pay for and remember to update. So a lot of people's listings weren't necessarily up to date, but at least it gave me a few people to look at in my area and led me to their individual websites. You can also search DONA's doula database at dona.org or the CAPA database at kappa.net for a list of certified doulas in your area. I'm pretty lucky in that I live in an area that has at least a dozen doulas to choose from. I picked 5 to contact and interview, which some people might consider a lot, but I like to be thorough. We'll just go with that. One of the doulas that I spoke to for a quick consult about her practice before the interview, and she said that I would know in the first 5 to 10 minutes if that person was a good fit. And while I was skeptical, honestly, that turned out to be true. So if you're interviewing someone and you right away have a gut feeling that this is just not going to be the one and it's not going to work out, I'd say go with your gut. When you meet with your potential doula, you're going to want to ask certain questions, but also get a feel for the connection. You could have someone that totally matches everything that you want on paper, but in person, you just don't click.
This isn't gonna work.
Working with a doula is just as much about the relationship as it is their skills, and so you want someone that you can feel comfortable with and vibe with. My top 2 picks ended up actually being pretty similar in their styles and their trainings, oddly enough. Both also asked me questions about myself and my husband and my birth goals, or what I'd developed so far, as at the time I was only 10.5 weeks. Anyways, that made me feel like they were really engaged and caring and were interested in me and not just trying to sell me their services. Also, I liked that they talked about including my husband in the process and supporting him as well, because I think that a lot of time dads end up feeling kind of outside or excluded from pregnancy and the birth process because, well, they're not the ones that are pregnant. And it's really important to include them, especially, you're going to be working as a team through this process, and so you should sort of treat it as a team process. Now, on to the interview. First and foremost, you have to make sure that the doula is actually available for your due date. The earlier you start this process, the more likely they are to be available, but doulas are human and tend to have families, so they might have vacations or other things planned, or in my case, you might have a due date smack dab between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which means it's totally possible that I end up having my baby on either Thanksgiving or Christmas. Some doulas just don't take on births that are near the holidays. If that's the case, you need to know that. Along with this, if you've already chosen where you plan to give birth, make sure it's a place that they actually go. Some doulas won't go to certain hospitals or won't attend home births, for example, so it's always a good idea to check. You're also going to want to know their training, any certifications, and their experience. I knew ahead of time that all of the doulas I was interviewing were available for my due date, so I started the interview off by asking them to tell me about themselves and their training. Next question was how long they had been a doula and about how many births they had attended. Combined, these things were pretty important to me because I'm a first-time mom, I don't really have much local support, and if you watched my welcome video, you know I don't have a relationship with my mother, so I needed someone who I could be confident in to answer my questions, advocate for me, and honestly just know what they're doing.
Being that you're the expert.
Perfect example. One doula I saw listed online described herself as entirely self-taught within the last few months, refused all hospitals even in the case of an emergency transfer, and under experience listed that she is outspoken, all while charging $1,500. Maybe that's your jam, but for me, no thank you. Not to say that there's anything wrong with new doulas. Everyone starts somewhere, and newer doulas often offer their services at a discount or even for free just to get the experience. They're budget friendly and can still be amazing doulas. But I would hope that their listing would say something other than I'm outspoken and not list a fee higher than the doula that I did hire, who has 14 years of experience on top of also being a childbirth educator. But, it's all relative, and at the end of the day, it all comes down to your preferences, your comfort level, and your budget. Which, of course, brings us to the next important question of fees. You're going to want to know their fee, what's included, and if they charge extra for births that take longer than 12 or 24 hours, or for things like parking fees, for example. Some doulas do that, and personally, if I knew that I was going to have to fork over an extra few $100 for a longer labor, that would make me feel really anxious and pressured, and you don't want to go into labor with extra anxiety and pressure. That's actually a pretty surefire way to have a bad time. It's also a good idea to ask about how many clients the doula takes on per month and if they already have anyone else close to your due date. If they do, it's probably pretty unlikely that both clients will go into labor at the same time, but you might want to ask them how they prepare for those kind of scenarios. A good doula always has backup coverage for things like that, on top of things like sickness, car accidents, whatever. Do not, I repeat, do not hire a doula that does not have a backup. Also, it might be good to know ahead of time who her backup is or how she'll choose that backup. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you still receive care even if your doula experiences her own emergency. If you have prepared to have that support at your labor, you don't want to suddenly not have that support. All of the doulas that I interviewed had packages that included 1 or 2 prenatal visits, and as far as I can tell, that seems to be pretty common. You'll want to ask how long these visits are, what they entail, where they're held, and what they actually cover, as well as if you can purchase extra in-person visits. This helped me really gauge their competency and style too, because a couple said, whatever you need, while others said, yeah, it depends on what you need, but I always include education on all the possible interventions and how you feel about them in case they come up during labor, or said things like, I provide a mini childbirth education class if you haven't taken one, and we go through comfort measures that might help you during labor. As you can see, there's a pretty big difference in those answers. I also asked about their personal style and what they typically do to help support their clients during labor. Some doulas were more emotionally focused, some were equally emotionally and physically focused. One was also trained in acupressure, which I thought was pretty cool. So again, it's whatever your preference is. Another big one, since this is someone that you are hiring to support you during your birth, you want to know if you can call, text, or email them with questions, and you want to know when they become on call for your birth. For example, the doulas that I spoke to all started to be on call around 37 to 38 weeks, and you also want to know at what point in labor she will meet up with you. You'll also want to ask how they feel about cesarean births and if they attend cesareans. Doulas should be supportive of all births, and sometimes it's in a mom's and baby's best interest to have a C-section because things happen. You're going to want to know if your doula will support these choices and attend such a birth. Some might flat out refuse, while others might tell you that it's against a certain hospital's policy. But what I found is that while one doula said she wouldn't attend a C-section unless it was at a certain hospital because the others didn't allow doulas present, other doulas that had better relationships with the local hospitals said that they would try to be present in the OR, but were usually let in at least for recovery. Really, that answer came down to how well they knew the care providers at that facility as to whether or not they were typically let into the operating room. So if you are someone that's high risk or think that you might end up being high risk, you definitely want to make sure that your doula has a good relationship with your care providers so she could possibly go in that operating room if needed. In a similar vein, you'll want to ask how they feel about the use of pain medications. Some only support natural births, so again, you'll want to know that your doula supports your choices if you're planning to have an epidural or other pain medications. And a few final questions. Just as how you'll want to know if they charge extra for longer births, you'll want to know what happens if birth is so fast that they can't get there, or if in the age of COVID that also makes them unable to attend. My doula's policy is that if for some reason she and backup couldn't attend, in the event of a change in COVID policies, for example, she would offer virtual support, and if that wasn't an option for whatever reason, then you could get a refund. And finally, if they didn't explain it in their fees and packages, you're going to want to know how long they stay with you after the birth and if they include any postpartum visits. If you're going to give birth in a hospital, the amount of time they stay with you after the birth might be influenced by hospital policy, so that'll be something to check. It might also be a good idea to ask for references just like you would if hiring an employee or a babysitter if they don't have testimonials or reviews anywhere online that you can read. You might also want to ask them about their own childbirth experiences if they've had any and what made them decide to become a doula. This will tell you a lot about them, and for some women, it's important that their doula has also been through labor. Hopefully you found this video helpful and informative, or at the very least, hopefully it saved you a little time from Googling. I'm going to take all the questions that I asked on my interview and throw them in a Google Doc and link that down in the description, and I'll include links to Kappa and Dona as well. If you liked this video, please like it. Consider subscribing if you want to continue to follow along on this thing that is my first time pregnancy journey. And of course, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.